Good morning, friends. This is Himanshu Srivastav. Today, we have gathered here to discuss on the novels of Thomas Hardy. We have two experts today in the studio. Towards my right is Piyush Joshi. He is the coordinator of PG classes at H.M. Patel Institute, Villa Vidyanagar. And towards my left is Ulupi Patel. She is also a senior lecturer at Sadguna Arts College. Without wasting much of the time, I'll just ask sir to discuss about the background of Thomas Hardy, and thereby we'll be focusing on the novels and different aspects of Thomas Hardy. Sir.
Good morning, friends. We are going to talk about Hardy and his novels today. But before we take up that discussion, it would be very important to talk about the Victorian Age, which happens to be a very long age in which intellectual fermentation continued for a very long time. In fact, the age was an age of contradiction, compromise, or prosperity, and number of other facets. However, if we look into the age, we are baffled at times by the variety that we come across. And I am interested in talking about how Hardy, one of the major novelists of the time, tried to capture the sense of the time in his novels as well as poems. Hardy, if we remember him, he wrote for almost 6 decades. He continued to write poetry, he continued to write novels, and the novels he wrote, but he was not very happy with his novels or fictions. He said that I am basically a poet, and he continued to write poetry for 6 decades, and the novels that he wrote continued to be written between 1874 to 1895. It was probably in 1895 when he wrote the last novel, Jude the Obscure, and the literary critics were so unhappy with him, they were so hostile with him, that they criticized him so rigorously that they stopped writing novels and he switched over to writing poetry. Today, in the modern times, people remember Hardy more as a poet than as a novelist. However, Hardy happens to be an interesting and very serious kind of a novelist, and therefore we need to look into his problems, the problems that he projects about the time. The time when we talk about is a wonderful time. It was the reign of Queen Victoria, who gave stability to the age. Stability brought prosperity. It was industrial revolution, prosperity of the rich people. It talked about several things. But Hardy basically was interested in a small section of society which he was trying to project. And Hardy basically, if you compare him with the stalwarts of his own times, such as Dickens, Thackeray, George Eliot, Matthew Arnold, Tennyson, Browning, he stands out because he has his own way of looking at life, which is basically different from others. And personally, if you ask me, I would say, friends, Hardy is a difficult novelist to be read. He is a challenge because he has in-depth study of human character, in-depth study of nature, and he talks about various facets of life. But before we enter into that, it would be very interesting to know what kind of age he was in. As I said, it was an industrial age, prosperity was there, urbanization was taking place, people felt that it was a period of transition and crisis, and therefore Matthew Arnold wrote in 1869 a text called Culture and Anarchy. He was worried about the society, that the society was moving into the direction of anarchy, and who could check this? and he advocated that good literature, good art should be there to check this. On the other hand, Browning remained a firm believer in God and the benevolent providence. He said that God is there in his heaven and therefore everything is right. On one hand, we have people like Browning who had complete faith in this God and the Almighty, omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent God. On the other hand, people were shaken, or people's faith in God was shaken. It was just because Darwin's theory of Genesis and origin of species came in. It was with this book he shook the foundations of Christianity. The authority of church was challenged now. And look at the book. The book is Origin of Species. When he wrote, what was he doing? He just put forward a theory that man and ape have descended from the same ancestry. That means man is not created by God. Man is a product of evolution, natural process of evolution. And this man has not come all of a sudden on the scene. Now this was contradictory to the message given in the biblical myth of book of Genesis. There it was said that it was God who created things, it was God who created Adam, and for the recreation of the world, it was God who created even the woman. So Adam and Eve were the creations of God, and the book of Genesis proved to be wrong, and that's why people were baffled and people didn't know what to do. And that's why Hardy, as a man of science and technology or temperament, scientific temperament, also did not believe in the benevolent God. He had his own views. He felt that this God is ruled, this world is ruled by, or this universe is ruled by an eminent will. Some power is there, some energy is there which rules this whole thing, and this energy is not benevolent. It is rather malignant, it is indifferent, it is cruel, and it doesn't care for the human beings. And that's why he used this as eminent will, and he describes this eminent will as a kind of fate and destiny. And when you look into this, in order to understand Hardy, the first thing that we need to understand is why did Hardy differ from the other writers. Other writers were talking, for example, Dickens talks about the social evils, especially out of industrialization. Eliot was talking about the problems of women, how women were suffering, how their emancipation should come up, how their voting rights should be restored to them, or they should be given the voting rights. All these issues were being discussed. Hardy is the man who is trying to project Wessex, an area which is in the southwest of England. Now this was the area where he was brought up, he grew up, he knew the area very much, he was so familiar with the nature and the background, the topography, that he projected that. So Wessex becomes an important thing. So Hardy is, whenever we talk about Hardy, Hardy is synonymous with Wessex, and Wessex is an area which is very well projected in almost all his novels. Secondly, which is very important for us to remember, is Hardy was looking at the issue of, as I said, malignant power, which doesn't care for that. And that's why he was not happy with those people who said that God is there, who looks after things. He, on the contrary, said this eminent will, which is indifferent, comes in the life of people in the form of fate or chance and disturbs them. It is so cruel at times that it crushes the man or man's spirit. That's why people say that Hardy is pessimist. But when we look at his novels and major characters, we find that these heroes and heroines fight. There are a few instances where they crush under the power of the fate or destiny, but there are people who fight out. And that's why when they fight out, their goodness comes to the surface, and we realize that They are basically optimistic characters. So it is wrong to say that he is a pessimist completely. He is an optimist and he presents his characters in a very beautiful manner. My intention in talking about this is when you talk about the novels, you will have to understand his attitude of this. And out of this, two important words come here, which I think as students of literature you should understand. One is agnosticism and the second is atheism. The word agnosticism or agnostic means a person who does not believe in God, or who feels that he wants to believe in God but he needs a proof. That means he believes in natural phenomena around him, but he feels that if there is some supernatural power, then he should be knowable, and if he is not knowable, then he would not like to believe. So agnostic is a person whom we can call skeptic, a man who doubts at the very existence of God. On the other hand, you have a term called atheism. They are non-believers. So there is a slight line of demarcation between agnosticism and atheism. Agnostics believe that there is some power, but then since it is unknowable, they would not be able to believe in that. Atheists, on the other hand, are not interested in that. So these two terms, when you enter into his novels, you realize that his novels and his characters have this kind of a attitude, that they do not blame, or they do not trust the God, or they have a non-traditional view of God or destiny. Secondly, the two more important terms that you need to understand are, one is realism and naturalism. Hardy is associated with naturalism. Let me tell you, friends, what is the difference between realism and naturalism. Realism is a mode of presentation of reality, objects and things as they are, as they seem to be. It is unromantic presentation of reality, or it is unglamorized presentation of reality. If you apply it to literature and art, then it becomes very clear that realism is trying to project life with all its seamy side, or you can say all the ugly sides of life. When Dickens wrote the novels, he was talking about the ugly side of life, and he said that he was interested in realism. He would do that. But there is another term which is called as naturalism. If you look into the dictionary, they would say naturalism means it is more or less a kind of realism, or there is a similarity between the two. However, there is a slight difference between the two. In realism, we are interested in what is being projected. In naturalism, we are interested in what is being projected. Over and above that, why is it so? So we go into causes and effects. For example, if a man behaves irrationally, you want to know, who is this man? Why does he behave like that? Or what are the reasons behind that? So from realism, when we move to naturalism, we are reminded of two persons. One is Emile Zola, a man who presented his novels in that way, where he was talking about the element of heredity and environment. There is another man who is known as Taine, T-A-I-N-E. Taine was a man, a social philosopher, who talked about milieu, the race and the man. These two people came from different fields. There was the arrival of psychology and the arrival of sociology, affected even literature and art. And that's why when we talk about naturalism, we have to say that naturalism would enter into the field of reality, but also explore and probe into the reasons why people behave in that way. So there two more terms come to our discussion, that is heredity and environment. Heredity is something that you inherit from your parents, forefathers and all those things. So it's a psychological aspect. On the other hand, environment talks about, it is environment which shapes the psyche and consciousness of the man. So, two forces are being put together in Hardy's novels. When we say realism, naturalism, then we have to look into heredity and environment, and we are concerned with two more words which are called nature versus nurture. Nurture is how the child is brought up, again environment, and nature is basically the hereditary elements that he has. These two things are very important, and in Hardy, very significantly, man is shown sometimes as a pawn, a tool which is controlled by these forces. Either it could be heredity, it could be environment, or it could be the imminent will, which is very mysterious. And that is why man happens to be a poor instrument in the hands of these forces. If at all he tries to resist or protest that, then he is crushed, or he has to sacrifice himself. So, all his novels more or less are basically tragedies. And one more thing that Hardy perhaps wanted to do during his lifetime was, he was in love with Wessex area, and he was interested in the rustic life of these people. He loved those people, he loved the environment, he loved the customs and morality and everything, the conventions, and he wanted to capture them in his novels. And that is why all through his novels there is a movement from urban to rural.